Patients and employees. What is the most insane thing you've seen or experienced in a hospital? So, I was a patient. There was an elderly man in the bed next to me waiting to be transferred to a nursing home. The nursing staff treated him as though he was a difficult patient when, in reality, he was just too frail to do things for himself. Anyway, one day, the nurse refused to help him go to the bathroom, as she said he was just being lazy. And I could not help as I was bedridden myself at the time, so he took a fall and hit his head on the floor. The male nurse just threw him back onto the bed. His family arrived, and I heard them asking the female nurse who refused to help him why their father was so groggy, and the nurse lied, saying nothing had happened and he was fine. Then I called the man's daughter over to my bed and told her the whole story. Needless to say, the crap hit the fan. Next story. I was in the hospital for an infection in the bones of my foot. I take medication for a heart condition and diabetes. Nurse came in one evening to give me my medication. She brings me strange-looking pills, and I ask her what they are. She tells me 2 medications I've never heard of, and I tell her she might have mixed up my medication with someone else's, and she says no, she's sure. Take the pills. And I refuse. I ask for the head nurse for the floor or a doctor. The head nurse comes in, and I ask her what medication am I supposed to be receiving. She checks my chart and confirms what I'm supposed to be taking. And I ask her to ask the original nurse what medication she has in her hand. The nurse then leaves the room, and then a third nurse comes back in with the right pills. Head nurse comes back in and tells me that the original nurse will no longer be responsible for my care. The next day, the nurse coordinator comes in with a digital audio recorder and notepad to go over all of the details of what happened the night before. From what I learned later, this wasn't the first incident with this nurse giving out the wrong medications. She had done it a couple of times to other patients, and I heard she had been suspended pending an investigation. Don't know what happened because nobody ever contacted me after that. Next story. I'm a nurse. We had one guy with a history of severe, untreated hernias who was admitted because one had grown so large it looked like he had a basketball under his skin, and he needed surgery. Well, before we had the chance to get him to the OR, he sneezed, and the stretched skin of his belly just split open like a water balloon, and his intestines tumbled out. It looked like he had dropped a plate of spaghetti in his lap. We draped some wet gauze over the area and rushed him downstairs pretty sharpish. Next story. I was a patient in A&E, and a young guy came in, drunk as all hell, and he had ripped his sack open trying to jump a bollard. Well, when he saw the needle the nurse had to use to numb his frankenbeans, old mate was not having it. Then cue what was almost like a horror version of a Scooby-Doo chase scene with flappy sack guy running in and out of rooms without his pants while getting chased by a bunch of security and nurses. They finally caught him and he promptly passed out, so they continued his care while he was snoring away. I was just sat in my hospital bed trying not to laugh too hard and pop my stitches while messaging my mom like, "You are not gonna believe what I just watched." Next story. I'm a third-party contractor at my local hospital. We basically clean all of the public spaces and non-patient areas. The morgue falls under us. Well, like many morgue, we have a walk-in freezer/fridge. Well, one morning, as a supervisor was walking past, there happened to be water on the floor coming out of the morgue. It turns out a cooling pipe broke and was leaking pretty bad. So we call the maintenance and repair people and get the water shut off to that area. There was about 2 inches of water throughout. So we cleaned that up, and because the cooling pipe broke, we had to open the fridge and transfer the bodies to the second spare fridge away from the broken pipes, so the funeral people could come and pick them up without going around ladders and construction. So we crack open the door to the watertight fridge, and because it was watertight, we didn't know that a second pipe had also broken. Turns out the fridge had flooded as well. And have you ever seen a video of someone cutting a pool and the water running out, as well as everything that was in the pool? Well, the water was so high that the bodies were floating, and we had that sliced pool effect as soon as that seal was broken, and the door was unlocked. So not only was 5 feet of water rushing out of the fridge into the morgue and into the hallway, but whatever was floating in that water did as well. There were sheets and gowned bodies that ended up all over the floor, and one actually made it into the hallway. The basement was flooded once again, and that was one hell of a cleanup. Whenever someone says the word floaters to me, that's all I can think of. This happened a few years back before COVID, and I almost quit that day. Next story. While in the emergency room for an asthma attack as a child, 2 teenage boys, they were brought in by ambulance. You see, they had been huffing silver paint. At first, I thought it was funny because they looked stupid with the paint on their faces. But then, my mom started crying hard. The older of the two sons was DOA, and the younger was screaming, "I can't believe I'm gonna die," over and over and over. And I can still hear his voice in my head 35 years later. Even worse is their parents' sobs when they showed up a little while later. It turned out they were brothers. Effing awful. Next story. Oh, quite a few things. First, patient in severe alcohol withdrawal busted out of 4-point locked restraints somehow, Super Hulk strength. His one-on-one safety companion came running down the hallway past the nursing station yelling, "Call security! Call security!" And here comes this guy, butt naked, blood flying everywhere because he ripped his IV out, carrying an IV pole above his head. Security took him down, we sedated him, and basically intubated him on the floor of the unit. Another time, an elderly lady, maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, had severely low oxygen levels. We didn't have ventilators available because of COVID, and the doctors were trying to delay intubating her as long as they could, supporting her respiratory system with a non-invasive BiPAP machine. But she was so confused from her messed up blood gases. She busted out of restraints, picked up a chair in her room, threw it at the window, shattered it, and tried to jump out the window from the 9th floor. We had to bear hug her and bring her down to the floor. She was intubated and we had to manually bag her while someone drove to a sister hospital, picked up a ventilator, and brought it for her. And then finally, there was the patient who was shot in the abdomen, who was refusing an NG tube for decompression of his stomach. The tube goes through your nose into your stomach, hooked up to intermittent suction to keep stomach acid and gas from passing into your bowels. Without it, if you have an obstruction or ileus, your abdomen swells in size and things like surgical incisions can rip open. But anyhow, he was completely refusing it, and we were warning him about his incision that it could rip open. And sure enough, it eventually did. His intestines spilled out onto his lap and he just sat there poking them, completely fascinated that he was seeing his own intestines. I had to tell him to stop touching them. And then he replied with, "Why?" And my response was, "Well, they live inside of you because they're not meant to be touched, so stop touching them." And he was rushed over to the OR. Guys, do you ever think about when you're listening to these stories and you hear the idiots and the stupids and the dumbs and the OMG WTFs BBQs that these people can vote? These are the people ahead of you in traffic cutting you off. These people breathe the same air as you. You go to the store and you want an item and this idiot poking his guts got the last one off the shelves. That is disgusting. Thanos was right, okay? I'm sorry, he was. Anyway, next story. So I went to visit a mental health client who had unsuccessfully tried to end it by severing the major vein and artery on both sides of the neck. This was nothing compared to the guy next to him, though. A guy working for some cowboy air conditioning company was not given proper equipment and has literally cooked off his arms and legs. He was completely helpless. Still in fresh bandages, he had the most beautiful, caring wife spoon-feeding him. His eyes were glossy as he saw me looking over at him, and I gave a chocolate bar to his wife and nodded at him. After this, I told my client that I needed a second, and I went out in the hallway and I cried like a baby. Next story. I was an employee at the ICU. A man had tried gunning down his wife who was divorcing him. She did manage to flee, so he drank concrete dissolver to take his own life. That stuff, it's water reactive, and all of the medicine we could give him were water-based. So basically, there was nothing we could do at all but watch him and monitor the situation. The chemical burns were so intense and you could see all the way inside. He didn't live the night. He was comatose, of course. Still, there were police officers guarding the whole night, and the guy was in handcuffs. Not that he was going anywhere. I've seen worse, but that was pretty hardcore. Next story. I was brought to the ER by ambulance. While I was waiting for a room, another patient was extremely drunk and waiting for a bed nearby. He asked the EMT if he could vape in the hospital, and they told him he could not. Well, he proceeded to pull out a vape and try anyways. The hospital staff took it away from him. After about 5 minutes, and when he seemed sure that nobody was looking, he pulled out another vape and tried to take a hit, and it was quickly confiscated by hospital staff. Next story. This drove me insane. I had a broken wrist and leg, and just had surgery, so I couldn't go anywhere, confined to bed, and had just gotten a new roommate. It was an old man affected by dementia, I believe, poor guy. His wife came in with a small boombox, which was strange, and she immediately set it up and started blaring what sounded like Chinese communist anthems, and were later confirmed to me to be exactly that. And these were played on loud, 24/7 to comfort him, and all we had was these thin curtains separating us, and it was the same 2 or 3 songs on repeat, so by God did it get old quick. But that's not all though. He'd repeatedly yell for help every few minutes as though his life depended on it. I understand this was partially effect of the dementia and partially because he spoke no English and the nurses couldn't communicate to him, so he couldn't understand what was happening. But that also got old fast. And he was worse at nighttime. He'd eventually settle down for a few hours, but even if he slept, I still had to put up with the communist anthems. All the nurses, they kept apologizing to me. I'd been getting on really well with all of them, and they did their best to let me chill, as they knew I was on edge. They knew my moods pretty well. Then, after almost 5 days of this, finally a free room opened up. It was supposed to go to a new patient coming in, but the nurses refused and made sure the room was given to me instead. And the new guy got my room. I was literally going insane and becoming very nasty. Not to anyone, but in my compassion for this guy and his situation, I'd yell and mock the songs. When he'd call for help, I'd yell back to shut up. It was totally out of line and totally not me. The lack of sleep and peace to recover was getting to me. Anyway, I got the other room with this lovely old guy who, despite being rooms away, had heard the cries for help and music and had been wondering what was going on. And I made him keep the door closed so that we could have our own little oasis of peace and quiet. And luckily, he was fine with it. He was a complete gent, and we got along great, despite a huge age gap. And then the nurses would update me and tell me they were doing what they could for the new guy, as he wasn't coping well either. But at least he was mobile, so he could leave the room when it got too much for him. And that's why I never want to hear another Chinese communist anthem ever again for as long as I live. Next story. UK patient in A&E waiting room. Fellow was sat in the waiting room bleeding from somewhere, not a small amount either, completely oblivious to everyone around him, including the nurses trying to admit him. Pretty sure he was on ecstasy as he just sat there gunning and bopping to some music on his headphones. Strange experience to say the least. Next story. I was working in a hospital and we had a prisoner in the emergency department. We were out of bed, so they had him in a storage closet with 2 guards. I went in to examine him. He had a port for dialysis with an attached tube. He was probably 6'3", 350 pounds. He's cuffed. As I'm examining him, he bites and tears out his tube, and blood just starts spraying everywhere, all over me and the guards. The guards, they were in shock, and I was in shock, and we were all looking at each other, expecting each to do something. Eventually, they restrained him, and we sedated him, and stopped the bleeding. It was at like 2 a.m. and just an unreal experience. Next story. I spent 3 months in hospital when I was 18, in that time on the ward, there were definitely some characters. A month or so in, I guess they were out of rooms in other wards, but around 9 o'clock at night, a man was brought in by a police officer and clearly off his face. He was assigned to bed, left alone, and I guess passed out for a bit. Middle of the night, I hear a shuffling around and a waking up. The guy, he's stood at the foot of my bed, and when he notices I'm awake, starts yelling about how I'm on fire. Everyone's going to die, and tries grabbing at other patients to save them. Security were called, police were called, because he was aggressive, belligerent, and even when they got the cuffs on, he was giving his best fight to escape or hurt someone. I don't know if it was desperation, fear, reflex, or what, but one of the nurses just yelled that they were going to call his mother. And instant attitude shift. Calmed down, apologized, and started crying. He was escorted off the ward and I never saw him again. A truly bizarre 4-hour stint in a pretty weird stay. Next story. Posted this in another thread before, but weekend afternoon, one of the first nice days of spring. Slow day in the ER for the most part, when in comes a distressed younger couple with their infant baby. Mom is hysterical and dad is barely keeping it together. Dad gets it out that the baby is bleeding from his mouth, and I'm skeptical because the baby looks quite happy, but I do see a slight reddish pink tinge inside his mouth. So I take the child and put him down on the exam table, all bright lights and tongue depressors to get a good look in the baby's mouth. Sure enough, evidence of blood, but again, no baby distress. Oh wait, there's something near the back of her mouth, kind of a darkish red color. A blood clot maybe? Not sure. So I have a coworker firmly immobilize the head, and with hemostats go in and pluck out the object. Amazingly, it comes out in one piece, and it looks like a plump, slightly larger sized raisin. I can't figure out what it is, but it's definitely not a clot. But into the specimen bag goes the squishy thing. No distress for the baby, vitals normal, breathing easily, happy demeanor, good color, etc. Time to get more of a history from mom and dad. First day outside with new baby and their dog. They're enjoying the weather. The baby's on a blanket, giggling as the dog runs around him. Wait a second, did you say a dog? Let me take a closer look at the thing in the specimen bag. And sure enough, suspicions confirmed, it's a tick. Deflated, to be sure, but a tick that recently had a large meal of the red stuff. Baby must have pulled it off the dog and then done what babies do by putting it in his mouth. Next story. A Vietnam veteran collapsed on the floor of a VA hospital waiting room and having an acute crisis while VA staff pretended that they couldn't see it happening. It looked like he was having a heart attack and he was screaming for help, and the VA employees just rolled their eyes and avoided getting involved. They acted like he was a toddler throwing a tantrum. He was alone, scared, and in pain while experiencing a medical crisis in a hospital, while the staff acted like he was a burden. Multiple patients jumped up and helped him while yelling for assistance as soon as it started happening, and stayed with him until I think someone called 911, and then the VA medical staff decided to finally assist because they didn't want to deal with the paperwork, according to one nurse that watched the whole thing. I don't know what happened or if he was even in danger, but the behavior of the staff clearly showed how little they think of all the veterans looking to them for help and medical treatment. I will never trust a VA hospital or staff after seeing that. Next story. Doctor's office, not hospital, but I was the receptionist, and a guy came in with what was clearly whooping cough, but he kept telling the people with him it wasn't while in the waiting room. He went back as quick as possible, though, and doctor said, "We'll call you an ambulance," and he declined. He wanted to walk out, and then he collapsed right in front of my reception desk. Luckily, doctor had already called the ambulance, and they pulled up very shortly after. Dude exposed an entire family practice to Pertussis, including infants. As for me, I was an extern at the time, and this was 2017, when I still had a modicum of trust that people weren't this stupid about infectious diseases, and if that didn't cure me of it, 2020 sure did the trick. Edit. Luckily, this was right before we closed for lunch, by the way, and you bet I sanitized everything in that waiting room. Next story. Used to be a frequent patient, so I have seen some crap. A schizophrenic woman in the ward for several weeks, screaming her head off about everything, including the nurses, trying to make her wear a pad, etc. Then was walking around the ward and saw the moment a woman passed away surrounded by her family. They were spilling out of the room and into the ward and was wheeled out shortly after. And finally, the most harrowing, was an ER, a man wheeling his in and out of consciousness wife that honestly looked like she was passing away and slapping her and everything just to try and keep her awake. And seeing the horror, shock, and pure heartbreak on his face is just stuck in my memory. Next story. My now late mother and I were in triage in the hospital, had to wait in the hall to be seen. We were seated next to a man that looked like Bill Fagerbakke, the actor that was in the movie The Stand and is the voice for Patrick in SpongeBob. The man looked about 40 and his elderly parents were there with him. Everything was fine and dandy though. I was twiddling my thumbs looking down until I heard a nurse speaking with him. The nurse says, "What did you eat for breakfast today?" "Well, I had a gallon of lighter fluid and 2 bricks. "Okay, what is your name?" "Bob Marley Mofo." "Okay, great, I'll be back in a few minutes." And then I realized I was sitting next to someone who likely had schizophrenia or some type of delusional disorder. It was insane and fascinating how calm and patient the nurse was with him. A few minutes after that, a psychotic woman was being strapped to a bed as she was having a mental breakdown. My mom and I genuinely thought we were accidentally in a psych ward. For years after, Bob Marley Mofo was our little inside joke. So, I just want to point out, OP didn't confirm if that was actually Patrick's voice actor. It could have been him just having a psychotic episode. So everyone, let's please put out some thoughts and prayers for Bill Fagerbakke. Fagerbakke. I don't know. I know I'm butchering that last name. And also, why not? Let's just give some thoughts and prayers to Patrick Warburton, the guy who voices Joe Swanson. Hey, Peter. Why not? Voice actors need love. I'm a voice actor. I'm not famous, but I want love. Next story. So I was in the ER for reasons, and while in a bed there was another woman next to me who was very obviously there to try and get pain meds like morphine or similar. She would roll around in agony when a nurse or a doctor was in the room, but as soon as they'd left, she'd be snacking or laughing at the TV or calling someone. Then, a few hours in, she gets a phone call and starts freaking out. Says her daughter was stabbed and she needs to go. And I know she was an addict of some kind, but her fear and panic sounded very, very real. She started calling for the nurse to come take out her IV because she had to leave ASAP to go to her daughter. She's crying and ripping out her IV by herself, a whole mess. The nurse who is discharging her asks if her daughter would be taken to that hospital, and the woman says her phone is dead, so she doesn't know. She's just going to wherever she last heard from her, and I still think about her and wonder if her daughter was okay, or even if she was real. Next story. I was sat in a Thai emergency room waiting area a few years back, and a guy calmly sat down next to me holding his hand to his face. Lady he was with went up to queue and filled out the paperwork and whatnot. I politely said hi in broken Thai, and he said hi back, and we paid no more attention to each other. She got to the front of the line, and the triage nurse ran over to him immediately and spoke urgently and rapidly to him. He responded calmly, stood up, moved his hand, and showed her his eye, which was in his hand, dangling from the socket on a long thing. He and the lady he was with were treating the whole situation like it was a minor inconvenience. Next story. I was recently admitted to a hospital. At the time, I was pretty okay and only 30. They put me on a ward with 70 to 80-year-old dementia patients, and it was 30 Celsius, no air conditioner, and the windows closed because it was winter and they were old. 2 of them crapped themselves, and 1 was telling me to wrap the medical cords around my neck to take my own life. I thought I was going insane and I discharged myself. Ended up being cancer, so not the smartest choice, but never mind. Next story. Being told the baby I was pregnant with had no heartbeat from listening with the stethoscope, but because I was admitted through emergency due to heavy bleeding, not the maternity ward, they couldn't get a sonographer to see me for 2 more days to confirm. The nurse left my husband and I in a room alone for 4 hours without even checking on us, despite the fact that I was bleeding heavily and begging them for help. Her words were, "This happens all the time, you'll have another one." The machine was literally upstairs, by the way, and being used for other women who were admitted via maternity. But anyway, that baby turns 8 now, but so wild that we thought for a day that he'd died. And again during the birth, but that's another story. Needless to say, hospitals aren't my favorite places. Next story. My surgeon literally yelled at me right after I got out of the recovery room. I had a surgery. He told me I wasted his time and resources. Nothing's wrong with me. And my favorite, "You really need to consider seeing a therapist about your issue." And now I have confirmed endometriosis and suspected adenomyosis. And he didn't take any biopsies, even though that was the whole point of the laparoscopy. Didn't look behind my organs, which is also the point, and burned tissue without testing it. And I realized afterwards, he only scheduled my surgery to prove me wrong. He dismissed me fully, and I kept pushing. He finally agreed, but said, "I know you don't have endometriosis," while scheduling the thing, and yes, I reported him. Next story. I was in the hospital for a few days with what turned out to be nothing, but one night around 3 a.m., they brought a new patient into my room. As they were getting him in the bed, he started having a full voice conversation about how he felt fine and being in the hospital was silly. In a very polite, calm, but firm voice, he started saying that he didn't need to be there and he was going home, getting progressively louder and angrier. And I could tell from the voice he was an elderly gentleman, and it turned out he had dementia. The weird part was sitting there in the dark as a larger group of doctors and nurses and orderlies came to try and get him to calm down. When that didn't work, another woman who was clearly fairly high up on the authority ladder started talking in a slow, loud, and clear voice, telling the crowd, not the patient anymore, that they were going to restrain and sedate him. She narrated every step while she was shouting and threatening. Very clearly, she was talking to future lawyers and investigators. The whole procedure took more than half an hour, while orderlies held him, which was different from restraining him. And then it ended with something like, "We are injecting him to sedate him," followed by a very quick fade out before they took him out of the room. And it was very scary and sad to see, or well, hear, someone who had clearly been a fairly smart, self-assured, and independent person going down that road, not understanding what was happening and getting insulted and then outraged by what he perceived as his mistreatment and loss of autonomy. It gave me a sense of what hell it must be caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's. Next story. A middle-aged woman came into A&D on her birthday with her son, felt very sorry for him, and claimed she'd lost a vibrator up her bum, had scans and a rectal exam, not by me fortunately, and was telling the history in front of her poor son that she was pleasuring herself up the butt and had lost the vibrator up there. But turns out there was no vibrator up there, and she'd come into A&E to get her bum fingered. When this was revealed, she was sent on her way. What made it more insane for me was that she was telling the staff all of this concocted story in front of her son. Lord knows how much therapy he has to have needed by now if she did this sort of thing on the regular. Next story. It was probably before my mom died. She was grossly overweight and heavily disabled, using 2 canes to walk. She was supposed to have district nurse visits and make regular trips to the lymphedema clinic, but between her reluctance to leave the house and her, well, disgustingly racist attitude to the black nurses, nobody would visit. So I ended up being her primary caregiver, while also working full-time. But mom's sedentary lifestyle caused her health to keep declining. The only time she moved was to go to the toilet or wash in the evening, or to swap between sitting or lying down on the sofa. I made almost all of her food and drinks for her. Barring the snacks she would grab on the way back from the kitchen, the bathroom was at the far end of the house, and my sister and I, we all lived in the house together, and the thing is, both me and my sister were the ones that spotted that Mom wasn't even getting up to get drinks anymore. She used to just grab coffee or water or a drink from the fridge on her way through the kitchen, but in the last few weeks, she'd stopped doing that and told nobody. We were on heavy watch duty while we were at home. Mom was super proud and didn't admit anything was any different, but we had noticed she was eating and drinking less, constantly constipated, and spending great durations on the toilet. She refused medical treatment, but one day, after sitting on the loo for quite some time, her foot had fallen asleep. My sister tried to help her up, as this happened a lot, especially now, but she lost her grip, had no power in the leg, fell and broke her toes, while also sitting on her whole leg and wedged under the basin. The ambulance came, took her to the hospital, finally, and they assessed her. And this is the most insane part, she was unbelievably unwell. Immense scarring of her liver, a distended stomach, hernias in several places, and cancer that seemed to have spread to numerous organs. They put her on some painkillers, but that transformed Mom. Normally, when out in public, she could at least acceptably feign pleasantries, but the painkillers just took off that facade. Now she was spouting all sorts of horrendous things. We kept getting phone calls from the hospital at each change of shift to ask if she was always like this, and we had to say yes. Initially, they were polite about it and said that sometimes it happens due to people getting confused by their surroundings or new people when on the drugs, but as the next couple of days passed, they were noticeably frustrated with each update call. After 4 days or so, though, Mom was completely unconscious. The outbursts and thrashing had stopped, as she had no strength left. She died after 6 days in hospital. We were only allowed to see her twice due to COVID restrictions at the time, and I hate saying about this, about everything, but it felt like a relief to everybody. She sent a text message to me while she was still awake, basically telling me to take her wallet home with me, but she wrote it half in third person, half in first person. I think she meant it as a form of authorization, so that if anybody asked, I could show them the text, but her valuables were in a locker anyway. We couldn't take them back that easily. That decline in health over that last month, especially in that last week, was terrifying. It was horrible seeing her be so vile to people like that. Normally, she either internalized it or kept it as abuse to hurl at me or my sister. All inhibition was gone, and seeing her being like that when these phenomenal nurses and doctors were trying to help was just heartbreaking. It may have been guilt from the whole experience, but I ended up doing charity work for the Children's Hospital that year. I still have the photo they took of me delivering their Christmas presents, and it was awful that they couldn't spend time with their families due to COVID. Next story. The hospital I go to is where police bring people that are in custody. So it's not uncommon for a few officers at a time to accompany someone in cuffs who looks like they've been through a lot. Once, there was a young girl who kicked the F out of a nurse in her stomach. Then the scarier instance was when a very large man broke free who was still cuffed and while sprinting down the hallway, body-checked every person in his way into walls, and everyone was just shouting that they didn't know what to do. I was still on a hallway bed and I could feel the air rush when he passed me. It was kind of crazy. Next story. I was interning at a hospital and basically I aided nurses doing mental tasks like making beds, delivering drinks or snacks to patients, and even bathing patients. One day, I was helping transport a patient for surgery, and the man seemed fine, chipper even. I didn't ask why he was there, so I just did my job. When we made it to the area where he has to be prepped, I stayed because I was curious to see why he was there. The doctor then pulled off his blanket to reveal his leg, pretty much soaked in blood with pieces of his flesh loose. You see, he had accidentally shotgunned his leg and was taking it like a champ. All he said was, "It was my own damn fault, so I can't be mad." And I have no idea what he was on, but I wish to be that serene if something like that ever happens to me. Next story. Not too insane, but memorable to me. I was in the ER as a patient, and there was another patient who kept leaving his room. I overheard him yelling and carrying on at the nurse station, telling them, "You got me all stuck up with needles like I shoot up crack. I don't shoot up crack, I smoke it." And I had to stifle my laughter while the poor exasperated nurses finally got him to calm down and go back to his room. Next story. During my time as a patient, I once witnessed a rather unusual incident in the hospital. While waiting in the lobby, a therapy dog accompanied by a miniature therapy pony strolled on through, bringing unexpected joy and laughter to everyone. It was a unique and heartwarming moment that added a touch of positivity to the hospital environment, making the experience more memorable amidst the usual medical routines. Okay, so you guys heard that too, right? A therapy pony? A miniature therapy pony? I feel like ponies are miniature, I don't know. But, what?
You could just have ponies in hospitals? And there's therapy ponies? Can we have therapy pandas? No, even better. Can we have therapy red pandas? Okay? If you don't know what they are, look them up. The internet loves them, and you cannot legally own them. So maybe, I don't know, maybe if the administration wants to do something good for once, they could do therapy red pandas. I'm just saying. Anyway, next story. So when I was 5, I had my tonsils and adenoids out. Shared a hospital room with a little girl who was also supposed to have her tonsils out. Became friends in the few hours waiting for surgery and prep. After surgery, I was back in the room, but she wasn't. She died on the operating table because she had a reaction to the anesthesia, and they couldn't save her. Next story. I was in the waiting room waiting to be seen for what turned out to be gallstones, not the most fun I've ever had, and a group of young dudes comes in. One guy's face and knuckles are all covered in blood, and his shirt is all ripped up, obviously been in a fight. The triage nurse asked what happened, and the guy's mate says, "He fell down the stairs." And the triage nurse was like, "Okay, that clearly did not happen. I need you to tell me exactly what happened so we can triage and treat you properly." And the guy insists that he fell down the stairs. Meanwhile, one of the other mates has picked a fight with security for whatever reason, so the whole group gets up and starts trying to fight the security guard. So another security guard shows up, and the whole group, including the dude who fell down the stairs, all get kicked out. Meanwhile, another nurse is getting screamed at by a lady whose son apparently came to the hospital in an ambulance, but there was no record of her son being there. There was some other crazy stuff, but I get the feeling that was just a regular Saturday night. Next story. One night in the ICU, we had a code blue on a woman. We did absolutely everything, but she didn't make it. Finally, the doctor realized our efforts were futile, and we stopped. She laid in the bed, and we were all just sort of starting to pick up, organize our thoughts, and wander out of her room to check on other patients. Then we heard a sneeze and a loud achoo. She wasn't dead after all. Her heart monitor started up again, and we all rushed back in, and she survived. Then, at the work Christmas party the next month, we presented the doctor a pepper shaker and told her to add it to the code cart, where we keep emergency supplies. So in the future, in addition to CPR and IV medications, she could just shake a little pepper under the patient's nose to make them sneeze. Next story. I was in the A&E, ER for Americans, when a middle-aged guy who was wheeled into the space next to me starts yelling and shrieking things like, "Oh God, this is it, this is it! Mom, Dad, I'm dying! I'm gonna see you again! This is the end!" etc., punctuated with a long series of dramatic wails. My initial thought was, oh crap, I've seen a few people die, but I've never seen it like this. This is going to be harsh. I couldn't see him directly as there was a dividing curtain between us, but I could see everyone in front of us. Then, I noticed the expressions of stupefied disbelief on the faces of the doctors and nurses, which confused me even more. This carried on for about 5 to 10 minutes. Then the wailing grew more desperate, and he finished off with, "I can see the light. I'm going towards the light. I'm going now. Goodbye, world. Oh," which tailed off into silence. After a few seconds of blissful quiet, he started again with, "Oh, I'm back. It's a miracle. I've been sent back. Oh, glory be." At which point, the nursing staff finally snapped. One marched right up to him and said harshly, "Mr. Smith, do you understand what's happening?" And he said, Oh yes, I thought I was gone. I've been saved. It's miraculous. I'm reborn. I have a new chance at life." "No, Mr. Smith. What you have is a nosebleed." Shout out to my boy, Mr. Smith. The way he was dying was the way that Deadpool dies at the end of Deadpool 2. Oh, Mr. Smith. Mr. Anderson will love to hear about this one. Next story. So, my grandfather was in the hospital and went into cardiac arrest as the temporary nursing staff left his room laughing that they cracked Mr. Smith's ribs and worked him over real good. Little did they know my grandfather's niece, who was at the time a DA with Harris County, heard everything. HIPAA violations, elder abuse, and more. She was white hot. All of the nurses were fired immediately, and the hospital was under investigation for elder abuse and its accreditation. Next story. I had a patient with autism that a lot of the other nurses, doctors, physio, and everyone couldn't really get through to him when speaking to him because they all spoke at their level, when all he needed was someone to speak to him in a way he would understand. He had a nasty toe infection and shouldn't have been weight-bearing on that foot, but no one could get him to use a walker or cane. All I did was talk to him for like 10 minutes about the things he liked to do. Found out he was a huge World of Warcraft fan and played it really well, he was bragging. So I just mentioned that he should think of the walker as a piece of equipment he found that will give him plus movement speed while injured. And then, not even 30 minutes later, I see him going down the hall with the walker and moving without pain. Everyone on the floor was shocked and asked me what happened and how did I get him to use it. Sometimes you have to talk to the patients a little more to find a piece of motivation for them. Next story. I guess it's not that crazy, but it's the craziest thing I experienced. I was in a room for a week next to a very mercurial dude who was swinging wildly between being chill and telling outrageous stories and being openly rude and hostile to people. He was making mocking, racist remarks about one of the male nurses, mocking his Indian accent to his face, belittling the female nursing staff, and making inappropriate remarks to them that they laughed off, but you could tell they were uncomfortable. Well, he was on some pain pills and an antibiotic IV, and the IV fell out somehow, multiple times. He kept abusing the nurses every time, getting vicious if he had to wait for his pills for more than 15 minutes, or if the IV took too long to put in. Eventually, the Indian nurse, after getting absolutely blasted by this rude dude, he had enough. The patient had been getting almost screamy because the nurses were too incompetent to do a proper IV, because they're all foreign immigrants. And so, I guess, the nurse decided to find a place that it wouldn't just fall out of and stuck it in the guy's armpit. Next story. Just a heads up, you probably aren't ever going to get the most insane thing the staff have experienced. We carry that one that scarred our souls, and we don't share it, not without a lot of work, and then mostly only to our therapists, psychologists, or counselors. So please keep this in mind, and go gentle on anyone who does share. There's likely something they thought about, and then they told another story. There's always worse. Next story. I was in the ER waiting room. My infant daughter was ill and dehydrating. There was a little boy in the waiting room as well, maybe 3 to 5 years old. As kids do, this kid developed itchy butt syndrome and reached into his pants to scratch his crack. Then some dude nearby, a grown-ass adult, points and very loudly says, "Hey, look, that kid's knuckle deep in his ass." Next story. I had an accident where I sliced my leg up real bad. 27 stitches bad. My mom drove me to the hospital. I went into the ER, and there was a lady behind the glass on her phone. I told her, "I'm hurt real bad, I need help." And she didn't look up and just mumbled something I couldn't understand. I slapped the glass, leaving a bloody handprint, and she still didn't look up until she finished doing whatever she was doing. When she finally did look up, she saw the blood and started to panic. I told the doctor that saw me about her behavior, but I have no idea if anything happened about it. Next story. There was a patient in emergency who was clearly not in his right mind and was escorted by 2 police officers. He kept yelling and causing disruptions, demanding to be seen, but the staff kept telling him he would have to wait. He kept getting mad every time they would say that, and after about an hour of waiting, he asked the officers to go to the bathroom. They escorted him to a bathroom. One went in to check the bathroom and then came out and let him in. A few minutes later, the man walks out limping and starts yelling, "Will you see me now?" He was waving something about it in the air, and it took me a couple of seconds to register what I was looking at, from the blood dripping down his hand/arm and down the front of his gown, and the guy slurring his speech and screaming. Turns out he went into the bathroom to cut off his own wiener and came back out waving it about, demanding to be seen by someone. Everyone jumped up to help the guy, and they obviously had him on a gurney and rushed him down this hall within minutes. Never forgot that. It was the first time in my life where I was like, this is the true definition of crazy. Next story. Not as exciting as a lot of the other stories, but as a night shift clerk in a NICU, adults calling in wanting to know if we could do a certain procedure, demanding to be admitted, demanding to speak to the doctor, asking if they can schedule an appointment, asking to speak to my supervisor or customer service, when I explain that every letter in the NICU stands for a reason why the answer to their question is no. And even if hospitals worked like that, as the night shift clerk, I am customer service. There's not somebody higher I can transfer them to. It's literally just me. Next story. Worked in IT in a hospital years ago. Someone told one of the doctors that the monitor on a computer running one of the medical imaging devices was extremely high resolution. The doctor immediately thought it was a great computer to surf adult content on. And not just any adult stuff, I'm talking from sites with all sorts of viruses. For those of you that don't know, a lot of complex medical equipment 15 years ago had to run on minimally patched or not patched at all versions of Windows. So you can see where this is going. Yes, he infected the PC multiple times, and because it was basically a custom build, we didn't have an image for it, so we had to reinstall everything by hand. The device was down for multiple hours, multiple days, because he wouldn't stop.
We knew who it was and spoke to him directly, telling him to stop, and he refused. It was a small rural hospital that couldn't really get doctors in his field. I don't remember which, so I came up with a solution. I ran this by the IT director and CFO to get their blessing first, and we knew which sites the doctor was visiting, so I set up an internal redirect for them to go to a page we were hosting on the network that only had a picture of the IT department looking very upset at the camera. We were not an attractive group of guys. Sure enough, the next morning we get an angry call from the doctor threatening to have the CFO fire us all because we were interfering with his ability to access medical websites. I got my boss on the call, and he got the CFO on the call, and the CFO started going down the list of the sites that we redirected, all of which were obviously websites that were not used for medical research, and asking the doctor if this was the site that needed to be unblocked. When she got halfway through the list, she stopped and asked the doctor if he saw a pattern in these websites, and if he wanted her to continue naming them, because if she got to the end of the list and he didn't fess up, there was going to be trouble. The doctor said that he was good, hung up the phone, and we didn't hear anything about it after that. Next story. I woke up from brain tumor surgery in a holding pen in the ICU they referred to as the bull pen. It was intended as a spillover area during triage in case of a large-scale disaster. The hospital has been building new facilities basically non-stop for over a decade, but this very public holding area had not been addressed. So there were about 15 of us in there, some having been just brought in by ambulance, some recovering from surgery. I was told I would stay there for 3 to 4 days until the surgeon thought I could go home. And it was like a dungeon. People wailing, conversations and clanging and laughing nonstop. My bed was immediately adjacent to an emergency exit, which had been blocked open to allow staff to use it like a primary entrance/exit. There was no rest. I overheard a doctor explaining to a woman that her son, who was brought there from a car accident, would likely not survive the night, as the mother wept loudly. An elderly patient moaned in agony as they tried to remove crusted bedding from his bed sores. It was beyond hell to wake up from surgery into a dystopian Bruegel painting. I spoke with a traveling nurse who said she would have never accepted the assignment if she had known that this was where she would work. She said I was the first patient to make a big deal of it and could not understand why others were not complaining. I am not a big complainer by nature, by the way. I put up with a lot of crap, and had I been in the right mind, I might have let this go too, but I didn't. I demanded a private room, at least to let me sleep for a few hours. When they said I would be there for days, I demanded to be discharged. The surgeon came in and said he had to give me permission, or Blue Cross would not cover the surgery, but he said he agreed that it was antithetical to healing. And the hospital, a large university teaching hospital, did an amazing job in every other respect, but the moment I became unable to do anything about it, they had thrown me in a dungeon. I said I would write to every news outlet and every paper. I recorded some HIPAA violations on my phone that I overheard. I told them I had them and that they had already been uploaded to the cloud. Hospital administrators then showed up. The surgeon and the aforementioned nurse took my side, and magically a private room became available within 10 minutes. Advocate for yourself, people. Next story. About 15 years ago, my mom fell and hurt her hip. I took her to emergency. She had to spend the first night in emergency because there were no beds available. My mom had a very high pain threshold, so when the nurse came and asked her how much it was hurting, my mom said she would like 2 extra strength Tylenols. The nurse said no, and that she should immediately start on morphine, the nurse said. And my mom said that was not necessary because the pain was not excruciating. Well, the nurse started screaming at my mom that she had to take morphine. We were both flabbergasted that she had exploded into anger at my mom. Now, my mom was a very strong woman and was not intimidated by her, and refused. This nurse went on and on. Finally, she gave up but looked absolutely furious that my mom wouldn't take it. Fast forward to my mom then in a room with 3 other women, all with similar hip fractures. Again, my mom only took Tylenol or whatever the hospital equivalent was of that. But this one nurse treated her terribly. They labeled my mom as difficult, but my mom wasn't. She just had all her wits about her and wasn't going on morphine. My mom was the only patient that walked out of that room. One of the women died, and the other 2 were completely spaced out all the time and never got up and out of bed. My mom has since passed away now, and I miss her and my dad every day. Best parents ever. Next story. I was an ER nurse, so I've seen a lot of crazy things, but one of my favorites is when I was an EMT based in a part of Chicago known for a higher population of mental health and homelessness issues. Homeless, mentally ill gentleman, he enters the ER with complaints of urinary retention, and it is determined he needs a Foley catheter placed. The patient refuses every nurse except the youngest and most attractive, and proceeds to verbalize to said nurse that she is those things while she places the catheter. After the catheter is in place and urine is draining, there is a relatively peaceful peaceful 15 minutes, after which the patient begins to berate staff for the turkey sandwiches not tasting good enough, the blankets not being warm enough, not being quick enough, etc. He proceeds to verbalize F this place and then rips out his catheter, stands up, walks to the wall right by the entrance to his room, and proceeds to projectile crap all over the wall. He then walks out without telling anyone. Minutes later, another nurse is squatting by the wall, trying to wipe away the damage with tears in her eyes. I have no idea why I went through with becoming a nurse after that. Next story. If you get pregnant, it is possible for your mammary glands to go into overdrive and grow so much that your skin splits and you have giant weeping wounds for breasts. It is also possible for fetal/placental tissue to have 3 or 4 sets of chromosomes instead of 2, and grow into a malignant, cancerous mass that consumes your uterus. It is also possible for a normal, healthy placenta to grow through the uterus into the surrounding organs, including the bladder. Sometimes there is a mismatch in the placenta-uterus interface that results in small parts of the placenta dying and floating across to the maternal circulation. See, this causes a systemic response in the mother that can be life-threatening very early in pregnancy. Dead placenta bits floating around in mom's blood can cause liver, kidney, and brain damage, and can lead to a life-threatening seizure. And some folks think that the decision to end a pregnancy should be left up to the state. Next story. During a month-long stay after a car wreck, I caught and reported 2 different nurses stealing my morphine and oxy pills. Then the biggest thing I learned from observing other patients was that the worse you acted towards the staff, the more attention and better treatment you received. Being polite and respectful with staff like I was resulted in me being ignored and neglected. Next story. Patient here, and I have 4 stories all from the same local trauma that I hospital. They have an ER, but also regular doctor's offices. I was a patient there for several years due to some ongoing undiagnosed medical issues, but I digress. First, there's the cardiac arrest. The first story happened within minutes after I walked into the doors for my appointment. All of a sudden, I heard a commotion in the distance. I looked towards the noise, and here comes this entire team of doctors pushing a woman on a stretcher. They were all moving every which way, and some were furiously pushing on her sternum, all while they raced through the lobby, and it was exactly like you see in the movies. They were moving so quickly that I'm surprised that they didn't Tokyo drift as they rounded the corner and zoomed through the double doors. I could barely see the woman on the stretcher because of all the doctors crowded around her, but I can still remember seeing her and fragments of her geometric patterned dress. It had warm, earthy colors like orange, gold, and brown. I don't know what happened to her, but I hope she made a full recovery. The entire encounter lasted probably less than 30 seconds, but I have honestly never seen such a clamoring. I may have stared mouth agape, absolutely stunned though. Not at all helpful, but again, I hope that woman is okay. Then there's the prisoner. Another encounter happened not long after that. I was somewhere in the lobby, waiting for an appointment or something. The hospital wasn't very busy, and the overall tone of the day was unremarkable and forgettable. It was just another day at the hospital, really. But then I saw movement. I turned my head to see a prisoner in shackles with blood all over his bright orange prison uniform, looking wild-eyed, chaotic, and disheveled. I can still hear the metallic rattle of the chains that restrained him. He wasn't limping, showing any signs of pain, or responding to stares. He was just cold, almost expressionless, and robotic. 2 officers on either side of him escorted him through the corridor, and while prisoners are human beings too, he was not exactly friendly looking, but can you blame him? This encounter also lasted about 30 seconds, but his presence was such a jarring contrast to all of the ordinary, invisible going-ons that just sort of blended into the background. As much as I can figure, there must have been a prison nearby, and that prisoner probably got into an altercation that was bad enough that it required treatment at a better-equipped facility. Then there was donating blood. There were 2 separate occasions when this hospital was holding a blood drive while I was there for appointments. They of course asked me if I would be willing to donate, and always wanting to be helpful, I agreed. The free t-shirt and cafeteria voucher, those were just bonuses. So after a few questions and tests, I qualified. So I sat down in a chair and a nurse took my blood. When she was done, I sat in another chair by the snack table, where I had a drink, I had a cookie. Then I was eating my cookie when all of a sudden I felt like my whole world bottomed out. I felt sick and shaky and I couldn't eat anymore. I put my elbow on the table and dropped my head in my hand. I just wilted like a flower. The nurse manning the snack table saw this and jumped into action. They had me lay down and give me a cold cloth on my forehead. Another woman handed me a banana and I was disoriented, but I ate it. Eventually, I recovered enough to function and finish out my day. Then sometime later, I was back at the hospital for another appointment, and the Red Cross was there again for another blood drive. They again asked me to donate blood. Thinking the last time was just a fluke, I agreed again. This time, I started to feel the effects while they were still sucking the blood out of me. I went downhill again, and a nurse came and got me and put me in a chair that tilted back. He wheeled me behind a barrier, tilted me back, and I just laid there for a few hours. I was eventually able to sit up, then stand up, then, once again, finish out my day. Fast forward about 10 years, and I've been diagnosed with POTS. That's probably why blood donation is so hard on me. I now have a much better idea of how to control it, but I don't know if I'll ever donate blood again. As much as I want to help, my experiences in the past kind of put me off of the whole thing, and I can't donate plasma either because I've since been diagnosed with a primary immunodeficiency, which is treated with, you guessed it, plasma infusions. And finally, there's the creep. So, in order to receive discounted services at this hospital, you have to go into a specific crowded room, sit, and wait forever for your name to be called, and then hand over a very specific set of documents. I also had to redo this whole process every year to renew my enrollment, and if you get an appointment the same day, the wait can be hours. This was what I was faced with on one particular day. So I grabbed my stuff and headed to the discharge lounge where they had comfier chairs, an icy cold AC unit, and a broad selection of magazines. I used the time to eat the lunch I'd brought, play on my phone, and thumb through the latest issue of Golf Digest. It was during my recreational reading that an older lady suddenly approached me and issued a word of warning. I looked up at her with her perfectly coified silver curls, and she told me that there was a weird guy following me. "He has crazy hair," she said, and she urged me to go wait in a different room. I thanked her for the warning, packed up my stuff, and went back to the enrollment room, a less secluded area of the hospital where I could bask in the presence of plenty of witnesses. One thing to note, though, this room is surrounded by large windows. So there I sat, minding my own business, and then I look to my left and see a weird guy in the window, staring at me. He looked crazed, and he had crazy hair. And oh God, it's that guy that lady warned me about, I thought. Thankfully, my appointment wasn't for a while still, and I was able to wait it out, and the weirdo just got bored and left. I spent 2 years going to that hospital, though. It was a revolving door of doctors, and I saw specialist after specialist and had test after test. They never figured out a diagnosis, and they in fact accused me of having a somatization disorder. It was exasperating on a good day, and I even cried once during an appointment. I remember going back home on the bus one day feeling totally dejected and depressed, while a group of other passengers were having the time of their lives, celebrating a sports team or something. I felt like I was in quicksand. The harder I fought, the deeper I sank. It all felt so futile. But about 10 years later, those medical records helped me a lot when I saw a fantastic geneticist who finally diagnosed me with a rare genetic disease. And thank you all for reading as I reminisced about my years at the hospital. All right, guys, can I ask you something? I feel like we've known each other long enough. Do you ever hear or read a Reddit story and just think to yourself, yeah, this person probably writes fan fiction? Just the way that last OP told stories, if she wrote some stuff on the side, I wouldn't be surprised. If she shipped a few characters and then just went a few extra steps with how involved she is, I wouldn't be surprised. Daryl Dixon and Rick Grimes are lovers in this girl's world. Maybe even Negan and Daryl if you're into that. But I'm putting my money that OP writes fan fiction, and I'm not judging, I'm just saying. And I am glad that she found her rare genetic disease, and hopefully she went back to all those doctors and specialists and said, it's real! But anyway, guys, once again, we finished another Doctor Medical Story video. Some of these were kind of wild, not as depressing, so that's always a bonus. But again, guys, thank you all so much for watching, commenting, and have a good one. Bye-bye!